of Information, the Honorable Minister of State of the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, the special advisors here present, the permanent secretaries. I especially want to recognize the directors. Permit me to stand with our ministry, the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, who are here in large numbers. Please clap for them. They're actually the ones with their team. And also quite a few heads of agency from the ministry are here as well. Thank you for coming. I can see all of you over there. And you'll definitely hear from them during the Q&A. And so I'd like to thank and appreciate our hosts from the ministry, the directors, and also the agency heads for turning up to be with us here today. Now, the media, it's truly a pleasure to be here to brief you about some of the things we've been able to achieve in the last 100+ days, and in addition to what Mr. President has been doing since May of 2023. Now, we all know that the 8-point agenda, this ministry sits squarely within item 7 of the 8-point agenda of accelerating economic diversification. And we partner and collaborate with a number of other ministries because we're enablers. So we work with Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Arts and Creative Economy, Ministry of Communication, Innovation and Digital Economy, a whole host of other ministries as well, health, just to enable and to make sure that investments, industry, trade happens within this economy. Next slide, next slide. Yeah. So I'm just going to start by telling you a bit about the 8-point agenda, and I've just done that, and then the ministry's role and mandate, and then what we've been up to since the last time the ministry briefed you. So this is the leadership of the ministry and the directors, the agencies. So I'll just stay on the mandate. Next slide, please. Creating and maintaining an enabling environment and regulations for development and expansion of industry, trade, and investment. That's the mandate of this ministry. And what that means is that this ministry facilitates the development of Nigerian businesses, regulatory-wise, policy-wise, for them to be able to thrive. I'd like to say a bit about the ministry this morning. Just under 2,000 people work in the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. About 1,100 are based in Abuja, and we have about 800 around the country. I would mention some of the departments, both whether investment promotion, the trade department, industrial departments, inspectorates, a whole slew of professionals working to deliver this work for the Nigerian people. So that's the mandate and that's the role. I'll just brag a bit and say that this ministry was the first, next slide please, to hold its strategic retreat in 2025. And we committed to 3 things. We recommitted to our mandates, and that what I mean by retreat, the directors and the agencies, about 20 agencies and offices under this ministry is quite a big one. We recommitted to our mandates. We identified 3 strategic priority projects that we would deliver under the CDCU, that's the Central Coordination Delivery Unit, and we identified the budget item that is allocated to that. And what this means is that we're geared up for efficiency and transparency in delivery because we know where the funding is coming from, we know what it is we're going to do, and we know how it fits into our mandate and Mr. President's 8-point agenda. So we have that clarity. As the Honorable Minister of Information said, 2025 is an inflection point, and Mr. President has made that clear that this is the year to really galvanize all the reforms that have been done since his arrival and take it forward. We also signed an MOU with Jumoke Foundation on digitization. The Office of the Head of Service has a digitization plan, and the ministry is now keen in to deliver on that plan. So Jumoke Foundation is partnering with us to digitize our ministry, just like the Office of the Head of Service. You can't even submit a paper document, as many of you know, but Nigerians may not know. So that's where FMITI is going to this year. So now, next slide, please. I'd like to talk about what the 100+ days has been like and how it ties into everything that has been going on. Next slide. I'll start with industry and industry achievements. You'll hear more from this from the Honorable Minister of State, Industry. FMITI inaugurated an Industrial Revolution Work Group. Also, he undertook an industrial tour of the southwest of Nigeria and collaborated with key stakeholders across the four, the Manufacturers Organization of Nigeria and other organized private sector. He also held a town hall meeting. So for the Industrial Revolution Work Group, to accelerate Nigeria's industrial revolution, the high-level town hall with MAN and other organized private sector with key industry stakeholders. Now, the key outcomes of this engagement was the announcement of the establishment of the Industrial Revolution Work Group, an elite task force focused on re-engineering the Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan for a modern, innovation-driven economy. Also inaugurated the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria as president and co-chair. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria's president is a co-chair in the IRWG and serves as Nigeria's Industrial War Cabinet. The work group has sub-technical teams dedicated to resolving critical industrial bottlenecks and developing long-term strategies for sectoral growth. So this is the granular work that the ministry teams, the directors, and the nearly 2,000 people I spoke about are working on practically and tangibly. There's also a partnership with UNIDO for industrial acceleration, and through this strategic partnership, UNIDO, under the Program for the Country Partnership, PCP, National Automotive Industry Conference, is strengthening local automotive manufacturing capabilities and access to finance, technology innovation, and research and development. Also, industry policy and governance, the startups for MSME growth acceleration, special economic zones and industrial clusters, value chain development in agriculture, mining, and sustainable energy and environment management. The National Industrial Tour, the Industrial Push Initiative, the first phase of the National Industrial Tour, commenced in Southwest, as I said earlier, and the objectives of this tour: conducting an on-the-ground assessment of Nigeria's industrial landscape, gathering insights to the fine-tuned national industrial policies, providing clarity to industry stakeholders on government-led industrial development strategies. Next slide, please. That's one of the pictures from that inauguration of the Industrial Revolution Work Group. Next slide. So the ministry also released, next slide. Okay, industrial assessment and bilateral agreements. The Honorable Minister of State visited Nigeria Benin Industrial Corporation. There's a plant there, and then hosted a virtual town hall meeting on industrial transformation, IFC engagement on decarbonization, Maiduguri MSME Clinic, and engagement with FCMB. Now, for 2025 outlook, some of you may know that the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment in January released an outlook document. So what you have on this slide are the outlook priorities for industry: the Nigeria Automotive Industrial Development Plan, cotton, textile and garments industry, manufacturing, MSME, census, and the work group that I already mentioned earlier. So that will be the first arm of our ministry, industry. I'll move on now to trade achievements. Next slide, please. So deepening trade relations with 5 key countries, we positioned Nigeria as an AFCFTA digital trade champion and commenced the review of our trade policy. Now, this is kind of a timeline of the major interventions. So from November, the AFCFTA Council of Ministers met, and immediately Nigeria registered its interest in digital trade championship at that time at the 15th meeting of the AFCFTA Council of Ministers in Addis Ababa. And then we also had on the 26th of November a ministerial consultation with exporters. So exporters have peculiar problems, and because this is the priority push of the administration, we decided to have a consultation with them to reassess where they are in terms of regulatory, environment, trade facilitation, exports proceeds, a number of issues, and how to break that into an action plan. And that work has been going on since November, working with the CBN on export proceeds, working with NAFDAC, on packaging rules and regulations, working with NAFDAC on the exporters policy, which was becoming a hindrance. So the Honorable Minister of Health and I had a meeting with the heads of agency, and the permanent secretaries are co-chairing a committee to really debuckle that bottleneck for exporters. So tangible, concrete work that has been ongoing since November. We also had the privilege of having a successful WTO trade review in November as well. This happens once every 7 years, and it's an important trade review. You use it as an opportunity to hear what the world feels about your economy. Nigeria had a lot of interest, over 400 questions that were answered judiciously. And so that trade review, you take that information, and we've been using it to adjust our trade reviews for Nigeria. We also, of course, attended Brazil G20, and there was an India state visit, AFCFTA roundtable in January. We had the privilege of hosting His Excellency the Secretary General. And at that roundtable, we also had Nigerian traders who have leveraged AFCFTA present and talk about their aspirations, how it's been going in actually using AFCFTA trading goods. We also had some of our digital trade champions speak about how they've been expanding across Africa. Companies like Flutterwave, Bamboo, a number of them came to speak for the Nigerian economy. So all that galvanizing, all the work we've been doing with the AFCFTA Secretariat and positioning Nigeria technically, the implementation and the review of our 5-year implementation led to Mr. President getting a commendation at Addis Ababa by the AFCFTA champion, and of course, we were awarded the Digital Trade Championship along with we're happy to lead and work with other countries. It's a very good one. And why that is important is because we looked at the GDP and services. Trade in services is very important for the Nigerian economy because that is where we're competitive. Over 50% of Nigeria's GDP leans towards services, all manner of services. But particularly when you look at technology, that's where our young people are thriving. That's where they have an advantage. Out of 9 unicorns across Africa, 5 of them emanate from here. Our financial services are doing well. Our fintechs are phenomenal. Edutech, agritech, hospitality, transport, name it. In the services sector, Nigeria is doing extremely well. And we're optimizing AFCFTA to create jobs. Another area that I should probably mention now before I move on from this slide is that outsourcing of business services is an area where we've been prioritizing because Nigerian youth can have jobs right from here and earn dollars. And we're talking about productive jobs, not only customer care service. So the first thing is that we're on a good time zone, we're an English-speaking population, and our youth are energized, they're entrepreneurial, so they can self-manage. So you can work remotely, they do work remotely. That program has already started. There's a NATEP under the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. There's another program under the Office of the Vice President, and yet another program under the Ministry of Communication, Innovation, and Digital Technology, Digital Trade. So some of the countries that we've reprioritized and refocused, we were at Davos, we were at Addis, we've had a number of meetings, and just last week we were at the UAE, and we took 14 deals to share to the tune of $5 billion. Pipeline deals ready that are already de-risked by a sovereign wealth fund and also by IFC in some cases, and there was a lot of interest from investors out there. So we continue to attract investment in that regard. Next slide, please. So in terms of policy space, one of the areas we've been working on is the special economic zones. We've been working with the fiscal authorities and the monetary authorities. In particular, you know that with the tax bill, we had to also intervene after engaging with stakeholders quite a bit, after engaging with the FIRS, the tax committee, the central bank, the operators of the free zones, the enterprises in the free zones, the Manufacturers Association, to come up with a position to input into the tax bill to make sure that we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Free zones are a tool for industrialization and for trade, for manufacturing that has worked well in many places across the world. So now we've all aligned in a place and we've made revised submissions to the National Assembly, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to protect investments and also make sure that the customs territory is well guarded and there's no distortion. So that piece of work was done. And then just in general, I'd like to speak a bit about trade facilitation, digital public infrastructure, much needed in this climate, like the National Single Window Project has been launched and is ongoing. It's right now in the implementation stage. Mr. President inaugurated it last year, and the committee did a lot of background work, of which in my former role I was a member of the committee. And now we've taken that. The procurement has been done, the partners are Crimson Logic, and they started rolling out that. So finally, Nigeria is going to have a national single window digital infrastructure, and that exponentially increases trade. Ease of doing business is ongoing, regulatory and bureaucratic reforms. I'd like to talk a bit about bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. Some of the background work that we've paid attention to at Mr. President's request, looking at some of our, I already mentioned the WTO, the next ministerial will be happening in Cameroon. So we attended a mini ministerial at Davos, speaking to how to get Africa ready for that next round of negotiation, be it finishing up the fisheries agreement or making sure that digital framework, of which Africa is leading. Africa is the first region to have its digital framework concluded, to make sure that the world recognizes that and other areas in that negotiation. So that's about this time next year in Cameroon. But just to say that also prioritizing some of our bilateral investment and trade instruments and looking at them again and optimizing them. We've been having very productive discussions and earning trust and earning, because what this does at the G2G level is that it enables investment to flow into a region when the investors know that they're going to have certain protections. So the ministry has actually been doing, and some of the agencies, a lot of good work in this area, meeting round the clock, because Mr. President has said that we need to clean all that up and make sure that Nigeria is investment ready, even to the basis of our legal frameworks. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'll just pick some, but this will be available publicly. I'd like to talk, like, it hasn't just all been rosy. We had a situation where our sesame was being questioned, and it's a leading export crop for Nigeria. And so we had to move very quickly under the advice. NEPC escalated that challenge very quickly, and we engaged with all the relevant key stakeholders, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, we engaged with the Japanese, we had a technical working group to move very quickly to sort out that problem for our farmers, because that's a key non-oil export. So just to say that in terms of market access, in terms of non-oil exports, this ministry is very vibrant, does a lot of work, does a lot of stakeholder engagement around the country. I mentioned earlier how we work with, how we partner with other ministries. This is an example of that kind of work. Next slide, please. So I talked a bit about the trade policy review. Some of the issues that exporters had mentioned, I talked about that also. Things like packaging, labeling, that can encourage our exporters to be competitive, because the less they need to spend on packaging and transport and logistics, the more viable their businesses are and the more competitive they are across the region. So we've been working on granular things to unlock those problems for them and encourage them. I also talked a bit about tax reforms and ongoing discussions also regarding export proceeds with the central bank. So just to talk about why it is that digital trade is so important and how the government comes in. So what does it mean to be a digital trade champion? So apart from the fact that it's good optics-wise, it means that we get to work in a granular manner across the continent and for the continent by pushing and supporting and advocating for, in particular, digital public infrastructure. Some of the tools that enable businesses to thrive. So while Nigeria has a lot of fiber optic cable coming and landing on our doorstep, fanning into the country, particularly in the low density areas, is not as vibrant as it should be, which limits economic opportunity. So as digital trade champion, we have the voice globally to attract investments to our country and to the continent, to make sure that, like the single window, like digital trading tools, portals, all the things that Nigerian youth would need to thrive. Mr. President has said that we should go for it, and he's led the charge himself, spoken about this a number of times, even in Paris, meeting with Google just about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'd like to move on just to talk a bit, and I can leave these statistics with you on what we expect to gain from the AFCFTA and why Nigerians need to know about it and take advantage of it, and how the ministry and indeed the government is going to support traders, capacity building, trade facilitation, Nigerian Customs Service. The CGC is even hosting all the customs heads across Africa in Abuja in about a month or two to make sure that regulations are unified and centralized so that goods can flow and as well services can flow, because that is what brings prosperity to African youth. So these are some of the statistics. Next slide, yeah. So just trade revenue growth and why we're why we chose to focus on exports. Everybody knows that we could do a lot more in non-oil exports, particularly because to diversify our foreign exchange basket. When we explain to people that Nigeria's economy is pretty well diversified, what is not diversified is our foreign exchange earnings. We earn most of our foreign exchange from oil. And so diversifying to push out our non-oil exports, both in goods across the continent and across the world, and looking into that market access, and particularly services which you can export while you're at home because it's basically online, that's already another good area. So all the things that are needed in terms of market access, building trust, building perception, Mr. President has led that charge just by perception management, going across the world and speaking about how we're open for business in trade and as well as investment. So driving trade facilitation in a concrete manner and also in the subtle, more nuanced expressions has been critical to make sure that our businesses can thrive. We're also paying attention to intellectual property trademarks. I know that the lawyers in the room and in the audience will be saying, Honorable Minister, trademarks, the director is here. We've been working hard to reconstruct the structure of our trademarks registry and our intellectual property legislation and regulation. We're working also with Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Arts and Digital Economy on that to have an IP policy that works for our creatives, that works for the entire economy to enable them to thrive. Next slide, please. Let me just mention a few of the investment achievements that we've had. Nigeria bid for Afrexim, the biggest trade fair in Africa. It's enabled by Afrexim Bank, and it's called the International Africa Trade Fair. It's a very, very catalytic game changer for any economy. Nigeria bid for it in November, and we were shortlisted, so we're waiting for the announcement. But what this meant was that we had to host a team that came from a number of institutions to Lagos using the National Theatre. We had to look at reforms across the airports, across the Blue Line, moving around Lagos State, how it works. We had to visit hotels and to showcase Lagos and Nigeria to the world. I shouldn't let the cat out of the bag, but we're really, really hopeful that we would get this. We put on a very strong show, and it's for 2027, which corresponds with Nigeria's 50th Festac anniversary. And so the first leg of it will be Canex, which is a cultural fair in 2026, and then 2027. We don't have it yet, but I want Nigerians to know that we bid for this so that we can have the full support of the country when we get it. I kept telling them we'll definitely get it. But I want to appreciate the agencies and the director, the whole team from FMITI that really put in a good showing, and the Lagos State government for the full support. It was a very good outing for Nigeria. I'll also just mention the tracking of Mr. President's investments. Someone asked me once, I think it was France 24, that someone had put out a statistic that Nigerian economy needs about $50 billion to be steady in terms of foreign exchange. And I said, funny, we did the numbers, and as at then, I think November or December, Mr. President's over 30 international trips had generated $50.8 billion in announcements. Now, where the ministry's work comes in is tracking those announcements and making sure that it comes to fruition. So, for example, about 2 weeks ago, the Brazilian trip on the sidelines of G20, when the largest meat exporters in the world, meat producers in the world, announced that they would invest $2.5 billion in Nigeria. They were in the country 2 weeks ago. Oh my gosh, I have a lot to tell you. Anyway, they were in the country 2 weeks ago to actually see what it is that announcements, you now have to handhold. You have to unlock every challenge. And so that's a lot of the work that the ministry does to make sure that if there's an announcement of a factory, if there's an announcement of an investment, if there's an announcement of a trade relationship, that we make it happen. So that's the work that we do. The big wins. I'm almost done. Next slide, please. Just some of the big wins, some of our collaborations, some of our regulatory impact analysis framework. That just helps private sector to know that regulators should have a due diligence, a stakeholder engagement at least before they change a regulation. So that work was also done. Investment opportunities, we've been going out. Next slide, please. We've also been repositioning in terms of strategic communications, which is where the media really comes in reshaping what Nigeria's perception about Nigeria is. We've been speaking to our strength. We've been speaking to the reforms of Mr. President, and we've been assuring private sector in Nigeria, because they're the best advertisement for this economy, and foreign direct investment, that Nigeria is indeed ready for business. Next slide, please. These are just the outlooks in terms of investment. Next slide, please. I was going to tell you about some of the achievements of the agencies, but many of them are here. NEPC, BOI, NEXIM, CAC, NADDC, ITF, Trade Fair Complex. They're doing phenomenally, and I'd like to appreciate them. And yes, so on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, thank you for your attention.